Hi, everyone. Great to be with y'all today at this River Rally workshop. My name is Jordan Maka. I'm with Bayou City Waterkeeper. And my colleague here is Iris Gonzalez with the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience. And we are here today to talk about our workshop, Rooted in Nature, Achieving Equitable Resilience. Y'all may have read the outline of our talk, but today we are going to highlight the lessons learned and the victories achieved in county and city level processes, specifically at Harris County with our victory around the Harris Thrives resolution and the flood bond that was passed after Hurricane Harvey. And we'll discuss the implementation of nature-based projects and the development of cross-sector approaches in advancing equity in the fourth largest city and county in the United States. Excited to be here today. As I said, my name's Jordan. I'm with Bayou City Waterkeeper. We're an organization that works to protect and restore our bayous, rivers, and streams and wetlands throughout the lower Galveston Bay watershed. And I'm really excited to be joined here with my friend Iris.
Hey everybody, good day. This is Iris Gonzalez, and I have the pleasure of serving as the director of CEER, the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience. Thanks for stopping by at our workshop today. Just to tell you a little bit more about CEER, we're a coalition of 25 nonprofit organizations that came together after Hurricane Harvey, so about 2.5 years ago now, really looking at how to address policy that would look at inequities and look at environmental justice issues related to both what was happening in the wake of Hurricane Harvey to people and communities, and also what was happening to nature. And so CEER is made up of groups, as you can see on the slide, that come from kind of more traditional green environmental organizations. Some of them focused on conservation, some of them focused on particular environmental issues like air, land, or water, and also some power building and community organizing organizations that are grassroots and are really focused on advocacy through building power at a community level and focused on things like community engagement, voter registration, and other equity issues.
Thanks, Iris. So today we're excited to share with you how we've worked to include holistic approaches in city and county planning to address resiliency with this equitable lens. Houston and Harris County are a big place, and there are a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges. So to set the table, we're going to describe our watershed and the key challenges within our region. Then we're going to discuss the solutions that we've worked to achieve and what this means for Harris County and the lower Galveston Bay watershed. And finally, we'll share with you the community vision for the future and our next steps. But first, let Iris tell you a little bit more about the formation of CEER and the diverse group of 25 organizations that began working together.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, so as I mentioned, CEER is made up of 25 nonprofit organizations who really come to the work with different perspectives and different ways to sort of operate and different worldviews. And so the idea of CEER was that the systemic issues that happen every day, pollution, flooding, air quality, lack of drainage investments, those things harm our communities every single day, but a biblical event like a Hurricane Harvey puts a really big spotlight on top of them, and also shines a light on how systemic they are, how they touch the intersection of multiple issues, you know, environment and housing, and environment and social justice and civil rights, environment and health. And so the idea of CEER was to bring together these diverse set of nonprofits who don't maybe typically work together on advocacy campaigns, to really think about how to propose a set of solutions that are rooted in equity that could address a way to move forward with policy changes that would lead to a systemic change. And so the way that the 25 nonprofits that came together right after the storm did that was to create an 8-point plan. And so the 8-point plan really is our set of policy solutions that we see as a vision of how to move forward to create a more equitable and resilient region here in the greater Houston area. And they focus on equity, on transparency, on how to address remediation for land and water, and how to look at recovery through a lens of equity and fairness, and also looking at displaced people, resiliency, and resource recovery. And so the 8-point plan serves as a call to action to our elected leaders and our decision makers on specifically what kind of policy changes we'd like to see. And Jordan, I'd love to throw it to you to, Bayou City Waterkeeper is a founding member of this coalition, and Jordan was in the room when the 8-point plan was getting created. I'd love for you to just share a little bit about those early days of the conversation.
Yeah, it certainly was a whirlwind right after Hurricane Harvey, on recognizing that we all needed to come together to discuss the solutions and really we knew what the challenges were. These are challenges that our region has been grappling with long before Hurricane Harvey. So it fortunately, in a lot of ways, it didn't take long for groups to determine what main points we wanted to include in the 8-point plan. Like I said, these issues didn't arise solely in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, and we knew we wanted to have an equitable approach in our recovery, and that approach needed to be intersectional with the issues that we sought to improve. So all of us being in the room together, we were fortunate to be able to meet with in the Houston Endowment Building, in their office space, and they have been a fabulous supporter of this coalition. Being able to meet in their space and sort of talk through what our main points should be and how we would frame them so that they were community-centric and they were coming from a place that we knew there had been systemic failures. Certain communities and watersheds throughout our region had been historically left out. So how could we make the language inclusive, but also really pinpoint the issues that we needed to deal with and improve upon to ensure that we were going to make Houston, the city of Houston and Harris County and our whole lower Galveston Bay watershed a place where we could all live and thrive together.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Thanks for that. So just to close out about SEER, currently we're a team of 4. So we're about 2.5 years old, and now have grown to a staff of 4. And our current advocacy campaigns include fighting for water justice, a climate justice campaign, a flood mitigation equity campaign, which we're going to talk a lot about today, and then also a regional resilience campaign focused on organizing folks within a 9-county footprint, including Harris County, where Houston sits, to be able to put pressure and influence policy at the state level. So we're really excited to kind of highlight what can happen in collaboration, the solutions that we're talking about, the issues that we're trying to solve for are systemic and complex, and its success lies in working together. In taking on these issues is not something that one organization can do on their own. It really requires a collaborative table and a collaborative approach. So we're excited to share a little bit about some of the wins that we've had together, and to kind of pick apart how that happened and where we're going next.
Awesome. Thanks, Iris. Yeah, so the big question that we're answering today within this workshop is resiliency and working with nature. And so how does all this play into nature-based solutions and resiliency? Within our region, City of Houston, Harris County, our connection to water is at the center of our work, and within our identity as a city. Houston has long been known as the Bayou City, and that is primarily because we have 2,500 miles of bayous that run throughout Harris County alone. We have 3 major rivers. We have over 120,000 acres of intact wetlands. The lower Galveston Bay watershed as a whole is comprised of over 10 counties. And we're home to Galveston Bay, which is one of the nation's most ecologically productive estuaries in the nation. So Harris County is home to a population that is over 6 million now. And within that population, what's crazy is that our population is bigger than some whole states, and we're bigger than 26 states in the United States. And that means that we have a lot of sprawl as well, and we have a large population size that we have to serve. So within these neighborhoods, within the city of Houston, within Harris County, there are over 140 languages that are spoken, and some neighborhoods are bigger than cities themselves. I'll show you on this map here. We have, and I was at a conference, at a workshop actually, when we were devising our One Water strategy for the city of Houston, and they pulled up this map and showed major cities and juxtaposed them against neighborhoods within the city of Houston. So we have the city of New Orleans is bigger than, or is the same size. This exact square mileage is the same size as Greenspoint neighborhood. Norfolk, Virginia, this is the same square footage size as Independence Heights. The city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands is the same size as Kashmir Gardens. So these definitely create unique challenges as we work to address the stressors that impact the health and resiliency of our environment and our communities. And our environmental landscapes are expansive as well, and we need them to be. We're surrounded by wetlands and native prairies. Right now, this isn't a Zoom background that I'm in. I'm actually up at my husband's family's ranch in the coastal prairies just outside of Houston. And these are natural habitats that are really meant to help manage the watery side of our bayou habitat. They are the sponges at our headwaters that help to manage and mitigate the amount of water that comes into our city and helps to lessen the impacts of flooding, and also serves as an important resource to help cleanse our water as they're making their way into Galveston Bay. So next, just to highlight some of these issues, I want to show y'all a video that was put together right after Hurricane Harvey, and it features some of our friends, including the Houston Advanced Research Center, and a good friend of ours, Lisa, their executive director, Lisa Gonzalez, and just to get a picture of the immediate challenges that we had after Hurricane Harvey, and how the nature that we have within our environment and the stressors that we've caused to Harris County have been exacerbated by our overdevelopment and our industry within our region.
We can't really get on the freeways and go anywhere.
We have about a half dozen family friends that have had to evacuate. These are two-story houses that they've just kind of walked out of.
on the Gulf coastal plain, the coastal prairies, the wetlands, everything that was here before us, it was built to flood. We've paved over a lot of those habitats that provide a service in terms of soaking up floodwaters.
There's nowhere for this water to go other than to flood out into homes and into the community and such. Higher evaporation means you have more water in the atmosphere, and it's got to go somewhere, and so you start having torrential rainstorms. The more green space we can get out there, the better it is. The problem is it's very difficult to take these developed properties and turn them back into green fields.
As a region, we're going to have to make some tough decisions, I think, about how we decide to develop in the future. Our challenge is how do we deal with those floods, and what mechanisms do we put in place to make sure that we keep people out of harm's way.
So as you saw from the video, this was a really big event for Houston and for the Houston region. Dr. Robert Bullard, who many consider the father of environmental justice, who's a professor at Texas Southern University, called this a biblical event, and you could see that in the video. And so obviously in the wake of this big disaster, there was a renewed appetite, there was an increased appetite to talk about flooding and to really think about what are the long-term solutions, how do we not repeat this. There was also, a narrative around the fact that flooding impacted everyone, right? The flood waters didn't discriminate. They flooded higher income neighborhoods, lower income neighborhoods, more white neighborhoods, more Black neighborhoods. And that was true. There was unprecedented flooding across the city and across the region. But, just to tie a similar thread to kind of what we're experiencing now with this pandemic around COVID-19, the message of we're all in this together, flooding doesn't discriminate. It didn't really talk about or address the longstanding injustices and inequities that underlie and are part of each one of our systems and have been created by our systems. And so we found, as in many other disasters, Dr. Robert Bullard's research also points to the fact that recovery money, followed whites and followed higher incomes and followed places of power, and left behind communities of color, low-income neighborhoods, and folks who don't have as much agency or power. And so, we see that if you don't have money, if you have these pre-existing conditions that are a result of your environment and of, what I would call chronic systems failure, that you're not experiencing the crisis in the same way. We're not really all in this together. We're experiencing two different realities. And that certainly still continues now in Houston. Almost, we'll be approaching the 3-year anniversary of the storm this year in 2020. And so people are still very much recovering in certain neighborhoods. And so when we talk about resilience, we also have to talk about the fact that some communities and some neighborhoods have been forced to be resilient and have been forced to practice resilience as a result of systems failure, as a result of being overlooked. And so we know, it's well documented. There's studies and research to show that those disparities in income, in where you live, are exacerbated in the wake of a storm, and that the more recovery dollars that come to a region, the wider those gaps can be. And so, really for us, this work was around how do we not repeat that pattern here in Houston? How do we not repeat that story and that narrative? How do we push up against it, really through a lens of policy, and looking at our policy to make sure that it does reflect our values of fairness, of justice, of putting people over profits, and of also breaking through this false dichotomy that sometimes comes up around, only being able to address nature and not equity, right? That there's this nature versus equity component to the work. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that came up in this particular policy win and this particular campaign. But I think, the point of SEER, bringing together those different nonprofits that come from those different perspectives, is to show and to point that we can create policy that can address both nature and people and equity. And so we're going to talk more about that next.
Awesome. Thanks, Iris. So just to, we've had our local landscape within this whole area certainly has a lot of wonderful and beautiful natural resources, from our coast, our bayous, rivers, and streams throughout the watershed. But like Iris identified and we saw in the video, as our population has grown and we've overdeveloped these watersheds, there are definitely key challenges that we face. And then also from the historic oppressions that we have, unfortunately, a lot of our policies have embraced over decades, and that have just become systematically infused into our policies and practices. So we just kind of want to identify some of these key challenges that we've faced within the Lower Galveston Bay watershed. And first off, within our infrastructure and urban planning. And I think right after Hurricane Harvey, this was definitely the story that was being told nationwide. And there's certainly a lot of truth in this, but it is not the only challenge as to why we have continuously faced a lot of these problems in our region. But they are important to identify. So within Harris County, about 80% of our structures today were built before Houston's first flood map was adopted in 1981. And that already has demonstrated just how we have caused so much sprawl within our neighborhoods and been placing communities and neighborhoods within floodplains. About 60% of Houston's stormwater infrastructure doesn't meet today's standards. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too when we discuss the flood bond and the passage of that and how the projects were chosen and why we've just had a lack of investment. Just to preview a little bit, one of the statistics that came out immediately after Hurricane Harvey that was a surprise to me was that our Harris County Flood Control had an annual budget of $60 million. And that was for staffing, and that was for projects, and that is very little money to do the type of work that is needed in a city that has experienced over 6 500-year storm events since 2015. And so these issues are long-standing and have needed to be addressed. Like I was saying earlier, 30% of our neighborhoods and communities are within the floodplain, and those communities are within the quilt of 23 watersheds throughout the whole Lower Galveston Bay watershed. And we lack significant zoning regulations as well. And so we've allowed our urban planning to place buildings, place communities wherever it's economically feasible, as opposed to thinking more holistically or with more intention about where our communities would be best served for commercial real estate, and where we can ensure that our neighborhoods and communities are protected and will also not cause future harm as well. So a community that has never flooded, and this happened in Hurricane Harvey and Tropical Storm Imelda, a community on the northeast side of Houston that has never experienced flooding, but a new community that was built up watershed now floods because you no longer have those natural protections in place. I mentioned those 6 500-year storm events. I think it's really important to actually name them. In 2015, we had the Memorial Day flood, where we had nearly 12 inches of rain in 12 hours, causing significant flooding in White Oak Bayou and Braids Bayou. In 2016, we had 2 major storms. The Tax Day flood, which had 15 inches of rain in 24 hours, mostly falling in Northwest Harris County. And then we had the Memorial Day flood with 20 inches of rain total, causing the Brazos River to flood and southwestern Harris County and Fort Bend County to experience tremendous flooding as well. Obviously, Hurricane Harvey in 2017, where there was on average 60 inches of rain that fell throughout our region and caused significant flooding throughout the whole city of Houston and within Harris County. In 2019, we had the May Day flooding, which is an event that is not talked about as much, but there were 14 inches of rain that fell within less than 24 hours. And that we experienced with that very similar flooding patterns as we did with Hurricane Harvey. And then Tropical Storm Imelda was in September of 2019, and then we had 42 inches of rain. And this was the wettest tropical cyclone, the fifth wettest tropical cyclone in U.S. history. Hurricane Harvey in 2017 took the lead. So just within 2 years of one another, we have had 2 of the wettest tropical cyclones in U.S. history, and we do not have the infrastructure to fully be able to handle the kind of water and the impacts that are caused from these kind of disasters.
That's right, Jordan. And to talk more about some of the conditions, currently on the ground in the Houston region, which I know are felt and replicated across the country and places where you are. We have seen that the need to do the cost-benefit analysis, or the cost-benefit ratio that's written into the federal policies, that any federal funded project needs to go through a cost-benefit ratio analysis, is inherently discriminatory, right? It puts value on property. It uses property value as a way to determine the value of a flood mitigation project, right? What impact it will have, as opposed to how it will protect people. And so inherently it has capitalism baked into it, it has discrimination baked into it, and we've definitely felt the repercussions of that on the ground here in Houston, in looking at watersheds that are mostly, communities of color that are lower income, where property values are lower. They're unable to score. They're unable to qualify for those large federally funded flood mitigation projects, and that has led to disparities in how that money has been invested locally in our region. There was a group that came together after Harvey called the Greater Houston Flood Mitigation Consortium, which was a group of funders and scientists and engineers who were looking at different solutions, and they did a study to determine, or their study determined that in our higher income and mostly white household watersheds, there was in some cases 10 times more protection in terms of flood level protection than in lower income watersheds that had predominantly communities of color living in them. And so we've seen how that has played out and has created this legacy of disparity, which again, knowing the data that we have from across the country, if you add a disaster on top of that, it can amplify and exacerbate that even further. And so, some of those systemic failures are tied back to institutional racism and segregation. Houston, as we've been describing, is a really diverse city, is a very welcoming place to refugees and immigrants, and has, since the beginning been a very diverse place, but it's also very economically and racially segregated. And so we see that play out. We see that institutional racism still alive today in our policies and in how investments happen. There was a task force that came together to look at inequities and found that at the city level, capital improvement projects, major capital projects funded by the city, almost, I think, more than 50% of that budget went to the two highest income city council districts within the city of Houston. And so we're repeating that pattern, we're repeating that legacy. And lastly, the issue of redlining as well has led to the conditions that we see today in places, and to think about sort of how climate change and what communities in Houston are going to be at the front lines of the climate crisis here in our region are those places that have that legacy of redlining and racial segregation, where there has not been over time proper investment in drainage, where there is a lack of green space, there's not as much of a robust tree canopy, and you see more intensified urban heat island impacts. And if folks aren't aware, Groundwork USA did a really good study to analyze sort of that legacy of redlining and to look at the intersection of it with the climate crisis and looking at across different cities across the country, how that shows up and how that continues to harm, in particular, communities of color. So all of this comes into our work when we say that our policy solutions and our advocacy work is rooted in equity. We have to talk about the history of these things and how they've created the outcomes that we are seeing today and that we're trying to solve for today.
Yeah, thank you, Iris. And I would just add to that too, within the city of Houston in particular, in our region, I would categorize it as we're the epicenter of the nation's sacrifice zone. We have major industry, mostly from oil and gas, but the chemical industry, industrial manufacturing, and what that equates to is major pollution and major problems throughout our region. We have terrible air quality. Our water pollution issues are significant. Most of our water bodies in the lower Galveston Bay watershed are considered impaired by our Texas Environmental Quality Agency. And this is by design. I used to work for a national organization, a national green organization, and part of the equation that had to be addressed then was if we're fixing problems elsewhere, but all we're doing is transferring those problems into, generally speaking, the Gulf South. I've worked in New Orleans. Now I'm a Houston native and now working back in my hometown. This is not something that has changed and has been the norm for decades. And our communities who are living at the fence line are certainly the most hurt by our inability to regulate polluters, but also ensure that we have a more diverse economy that can support a cultural change to move away from polluting entities and embracing ones that are more holistic and really serve for the betterment of our community. So needing to break away from this mentality of business as usual, it really requires this cultural change. And part of what we know, and we've certainly experienced in these policy shifts that we've been working towards, is that engineers aren't trained to think as social scientists. or to think about institutional racism. It's thinking about, I am just going to look to see where the pipes are going to be laid. I am going to pour the concrete here, and this will stop the water for the next, supposedly the next 50 years. But where our engineers are trained is that they're problem solvers. And we need to see this buy-in and from the leadership to think about these problems more holistically. If they are problem solvers, ways that we can stretch their brains to think about these issues in a way that maybe is outside their norm, but can be more community-centric and work to achieve the changes that we're trying to achieve for our whole region and for our city, and most importantly for the communities and people that live within our region.
Great. So next we're going to talk about a case study of a policy victory that we were able to achieve in Houston and in Harris County. So Houston sits within Harris County, Houston being the 4th largest city in the country and Harris County being the 3rd largest county in the country. And so we want to share some of our experiences and kind of pick apart really what was about 2 years worth of work leading up to this policy victory, and then also tell you about where we are today and what happens next.
Awesome. Thanks, Iris. So yeah, the kind of what kicked this off was in August of 2018. Our first victory was to address the need for greater and more equitable flood infrastructure throughout Harris County, and that was in the development of the Harris County Flood Bond. This was a $2.5 billion bond that outlined 236 projects throughout the county's major watershed system, and it's meant to address flooding impacts caused by Hurricane Harvey. So SEER members and other organizations worked together to ensure that an explicit emphasis on equity was included within this language. It was several months of hard work. We started in the summer where the commissioners came together and voted unanimously that they would set forth a bond initiative for the voters to vote on the first anniversary of Hurricane Harvey, and really set forth the efforts to think about what that would look like, what kind of projects and the systems that would be in place. So one of the pieces that we were really encouraged by is the language that actually expressly said that there would be an equitable expenditure of funds. And as Iris said earlier, we know that water doesn't discriminate, but recovery does. And so the language in the bond said just that. That piece around equitable expenditure of funds was so critical. And this was the first step in ensuring that the Commissioners Court would adopt a process that would center vulnerable communities, addressing worst first watersheds, and it named the need for an equitable process to achieve the values that we were working for that we wanted to incorporate at a policy level. And for the bond projects themselves, we are encouraged that a slate of projects would address the need for nature-based infrastructure as well. While explicit language wasn't actually included within the flood bond, the seed was planted for commissioners in Harris County Flood Control District to incorporate these nature-based solutions that instead of focusing on traditionally engineered projects. And the vote went up on August 25th, 2018, and fortunately the public agreed with the need for this flood bond and for the language that was set forth within it. A special election was held and 85% of the voters voted in favor in August 2018. So that was our first victory, and there were definitely some lessons learned after that, especially after there was a change of leadership after the November election.
Yeah, that's right, Jordan. And to kind of pick up the timeline, it's important to note that when the vote came to county commission to approve that language and to approve the bond to put out to voters, it was a unanimous vote. There was unanimous consensus, and that was, though our county leadership is nonpartisan, that was under a more conservative administration, and the election in November, shortly after that first year of anniversary of Hurricane Harvey, really led to a flip in the administration and the leadership, and that was an important factor in the campaign and the work that followed, that we carried out. But really, I think what we learned is that to say and to use the word equity, can have different meanings, or can kind of stir up different connotations for folks. And what we really saw after the bond was approved by voters and the election took place and there was this change in the administration, is that to kind of put into action and to put into practice those words that were written into the bond language received a tremendous amount of pushback, right? And so essentially what the county commission asked our flood control district to do was to come up with a framework on using the equity language, how to prioritize those flood mitigation projects that were on that list connected to that $2.5 billion of resources, and how to basically put equity into action. And we lifted up before, our engineers, like, they've received no training in this, right? There was no, this was a foreign concept for them. They had never really been asked to do this before. And so they started to look at different ways to kind of categorize and prioritize projects. And one of them that was being used was to use low to moderate income data from HUD on how to determine which projects would happen first, and how to sequence the work to be carried out by flood control district. And that received a tremendous amount of pushback. There was some news coverage locally from our local Fox channel about that. And I'll just read from one of these headlines, that a week had passed since Fox 26 News reported emerging fears that Harris County was proposing criteria for funding flood protection projects that would favor some low-income neighborhoods. And you can see the protests, the pushback came from all over: a congressperson, a Harris County commissioner, a local mayor, and our business community. And so it really kind of opened a can of worms around this concept of social science and social engineering, and kind of, how we were using science and what qualified as science to make decisions around how to serve our communities and to protect our communities from flooding. And so this, I think kind of we were a bit thrown off and surprised by how much pushback there was. I think that with any policy work, any advocacy work, that's really about systems change, when you see this level of disruption and of discomfort, it's a sign that you're kind of, shaking things up and doing something. But I think that it really kind of pushed us back. If you think about this, the new county leader, this is her first time running for office. This is her first time holding office. She's a young immigrant Latina leader, and just because of the very nature of all that, received a lot of pushback just about assuming that role. And so it really kind of led us to think about how to message equity and how to really be explicit and specific about what we were talking about and what it was asking for, and how that would benefit everyone. How for too long our systems had overlooked folks, and that was not living out the value of fairness, and that protecting and investing in preparedness, we know, helps save money in the long run of recovery. And so there was a tremendous effort to kind of revisit and also find different tools that we could really use to validate that social science part, that sort of social justice part, and how to really bake that into the operations of our engineers and our flood control district
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I mean, it was really important that we had ensured that the Commissioners Court was going to be obligated to develop this equitable framework for the disbursement of funds. And we knew that part of that would be a pathway to, our pathway to success would be ensuring that the flood control district was on board with this framework. And part of that framework, like Iris mentioned, is, wanting to use tools that would really lift up equity, that would embrace our community's needs and ensure that we were incorporating a wider array of factors that identified neighborhoods and communities to prioritize. So that tool that we ended up settling on, or that the Harris County Flood Control settled on, was utilizing the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index. And this is a tool that is used many other places, including here in Texas, when thinking about how to prioritize or set criteria within projects and programs to ensure that they're meeting the needs of diverse communities.
That's right. And I think it's important to note, that this was something that, can be mapped, kind of speaks to GIS, can be geospatially, understood, and can be taken off the shelf, right? It exists, and it has been proven as a tool that other municipalities have used across the country. And I think that helped with some of the buy-in, again, to ask engineers who often think of kind of their work in a bit of a tunnel vision, or that, they're working on this specific issue, to really ask them to widen what they considered their job, and giving them a tool that could help them kind of understand that framework. And so, in the months and days leading up to the vote on the 2-year anniversary of Harvey, on this equity framework that was going to then get institutionalized in Harris County Flood Control District, we were really pleased to see the leader, the executive director of the Harris County Flood Control District, kind of learn and be exposed to this CDC Social Vulnerability Index tool. And there's a really great moment of hearing him talk about it and explain it, and defend it to the Harris County Commission, and talk about how it could add value to their engineering work.
We fix it. But if you look at the definition of resiliency, and it's really, in summation, how quickly can a community rebound after a disaster? Well, then you have to take into account a human element. And in our minds, and the research that Judge, your office has done, some other commissioner's office has done, we feel comfortable that the SVI component, which doesn't take into account just your socioeconomic status, there's about 12 or 15 different things that it takes into consideration. The Congresswoman mentioned mobile homes. That's a consideration in the SVI indices. Population densities, the composition of the family within the structures. Are there disabled people there? Are there elderly people there? Young children, people with disabilities, maybe folks that have limited mobility. So in our thought, we have a very solid foundation for addressing the infrastructure needs, and the SVI component brings in the human needs, and this is what we feel is the best mesh of those two, looking forward to introduce more resiliency in Harris County.
And so just to go through the kind of components of the Harris Rise resolution, which did pass on the 2-year anniversary of Harvey. It includes, upholding this equity language in the flood mitigation project prioritization. It includes using the CDC's SVI tool to understand impacts to infrastructure and humans. And it also calls for a comprehensive approach. So asking for our flood control district to really think about how to solve for multiple problems, and how to also engage multiple departments, to be able to have the whole county show up for these projects, and to really ask our flood control department to be a convener internally of other county departments that would be needed to really bring this holistic approach. It also called for nature-based solutions, which we'll talk more about. And lastly, it called for a reimagination, or a sort of a restart of a community task force that could really be representative of the full county geographically, but that could also be a place to really wrestle through and continue the conversations around equity, and to really help with that learning curve within the county flood control district on how to really institutionalize this, right? Our goal was really kind of tied to this specific bond and the specific pot of money and the specific list of projects as a starting point. What we really want to see is institutional culture change. And we know that we have to start kind of in one corner of the universe to be able to spread that out to other parts of the county, but we wanted the community task force to really be the place where that learning could continue to take place.
Awesome. Yeah, and I just want to expand a little bit on the inclusion of and prioritization of nature-based solutions within our flood management and mitigation projects, and incorporating that criteria and values into the projects that were going to be implemented by Harris County Flood Control to mitigate flooding and also improve our waterways. For decades, we've seen how gray infrastructure has torn away at the fabric of our natural systems, and Hurricane Harvey demonstrated that we have to do better. And the underlying factor within that is ensuring that we work with rather than against nature. A big piece of that, and part of the equitable framework as well, nature-based solutions generally are more cost-effective long-term and are certainly more adaptable to our changing climate. So instead of a gray infrastructure, concreted bayou that the concrete has to be torn up and replaced in 50 years, by naturalizing our bayous, those systems are able to adapt themselves to their current environment and are also able to hold back floodwaters, are able to slow down floodwaters, and put systems in place that can really benefit the community on a much longer term than 20, 30, 50 years, but for the life of the system. And so being able to point to those examples and be able to give that insight to Harris County Flood Control and say, if we think differently about these projects, if we can look outside of our gray concrete box and embrace more green, nature-based projects, or at the very least, include some of the tenets of nature-based solutions within these more traditionally engineered projects. These projects can have long-term effects and can also have so many co-benefits that are really protecting and enhancing communities across our region.
Yeah, that's right. And, I think from an equity and social justice perspective, and the neighborhoods and community leaders that we help to organize as a part of this policy campaign also have, questions around, why not green infrastructure in their neighborhoods, right? Like, why not green space in their communities? Why are those kinds of investments made in certain parts of town and not in their backyards? And so I think, that making sure to break through that false dichotomy of, we can only invest in nature, or we can only invest in equity or in people, and really seeing it as one whole, as one comprehensive unit that really we can be solving for all of that together. That's part of taking on a comprehensive approach. And I think that, the folks around the table who were a part of this campaign really were part of the secret sauce. We're part of the magic of why we were successful. And so I just wanted to name some of those groups and talk about sort of what specific strengths they brought to the table that helped really achieve a win. So, there were groups, the Texas Organizing Project, who really is a community organizing and base building and leadership development organization, specifically working with Black and Brown communities to build power to seek change. Bayou City Waterkeeper, of course. We also had Texas Southern University, which is one of our historically Black colleges and universities here in Houston, a professor who is also a trained engineer and has a lot of experience, was an elected official in New Orleans after Katrina, and has a lot of experience with hazard mitigation and her lens. And then we also had Texas Housers, who is a housing justice advocacy organization, really focused on the legacy of redlining and racial segregation on communities. And then, all those folks are members of SEER, but then SEER also partnered with another coalition, another collaborative of organizations called the Home Coalition, the Houston Organizing Movement for Equity Coalition. And so just to demonstrate what really it took, right, in terms of different organizations coming together and really building something that was bigger than the sum of its parts. And in particular, to name really the organizing and power building piece of this, and the importance of having environmental groups and other groups partner with power building community organizing groups like the Texas Organizing Project. Their model really follows kind of the full continuum of organizing. So from developing leaders in local neighborhoods, connecting them to voting and elections, being able to, they have a 501c4 arm that helps them engage in campaigning and screening candidates and holding candidate forums and doing that kind of electoral work, but then also engaging those folks in policy and advocacy and direct actions. All of that was the drumbeat really leading up to the vote on the 2-year anniversary of Harvey. And those were the folks who were showing up to speak at County Commission, who were calling their elected leaders, who were sharing their stories, and who were really demanding change in their neighborhoods. And so next we'll actually hear directly from some of those folks who came and testified and provided testimony on the day of the vote.
Shirley Ronquillo. Dear Commissioners, my name is Shirley Ronquillo, and I am a resident and community leader of the Aldine area. I speak on behalf of my neighbors, families who are still trying to repair their homes from Harvey, immigrant families afraid to ask for help, although they still have mold in their homes, and children who wait long hours in the emergency room because of breathing problems the mold in their home causes. I am here to ask you to please adopt the Harris-Dries resolution as a means to distribute the $2.5 billion flooding bond money in an equitable manner to communities like mine, communities which flood anytime it rains, established communities like the Aldine community, which are resilient and will not be bought out. Residents on Bentley near Little York have to wade through water on days like this past Sunday when it poured and a wrecker had to pull a vehicle out of the water. Residents waded through waist-deep water with their children on their shoulders during Allison when water rose 4 feet along Hall's Bayou. Residents waded through Coas as water rose 2 to 3 feet when Harvey waters began to rise. Residents like myself stayed in our homes to protect them after word of looting spread through Snapchat. Residents off Gulf Bank grabbed their children in fear and walked towards Airline, fearful of the strong Halls Bayou current as water rose 4 to 6 feet. None of us called 911. Therefore, flooding data does not include communities like Aldine since we did not call for help. Harris County is not aware of the actual number of people in our community because there are several families and homes. Worse yet, the political climate has instilled fear, so even the census may not capture how many people live in our community. We need your help. We need your help to take an accurate count of families still trying to recover from Harvey. We need your vote to adopt the Harris-Dries resolution to ensure projects we voted on are completed. Currently, C21 on the bond project has been removed, and no one in the Harris County Flood Control District is able to tell me why. All I know is $150,000 that was going to be used to conduct a study along Halls Bayou near Hopper is going elsewhere. We need your support. We need your support to ensure funds are equitably distributed to communities without flood insurance, like the Aldine community and many along Greens Bayou. We need your support to protect our families and prevent future flooding. My neighbors, your constituents, and my Aldine community are counting on you to think about the people who are affected by flooding. I ask you to think about all the families working today and not able to be present to share their stories. I ask you to please vote favorably on the Harris Rise resolution. Thank you for your time.
What we're actually talking about is pretty simple. And it's the fact that everyone in this room and in this county deserves to be safe from flooding. And Commissioner Cagle is right when you say that water doesn't discriminate. What discriminates is recovery. What discriminates are courts that don't invest in what matters. And what matters most is the infrastructure to keep us safe. And I agree with you all that Flood Control District is full of brilliant minds that do really, really important work, but they have not been properly supported. And that's a problem that predates the court that stands before me. From Harvey to chemical disasters this year, the disasters have shown us that for long enough the county has not spent money on what matters most, our safety. And frankly, all of Harris County deserves an apology from those on the court who in past years have not led with the courage to protect us from disasters, and those who force us to fight for scraps. The prioritization framework in this resolution recognizes that all Harris County residents deserve equal protection. Anything less betrays our values and is a violation of civil rights of the Harris County residents. I look forward to the passage of this resolution and the start of an actually just recovery. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Iris. That was, being able to see these faces again is just so powerful to remember why community voices are critical to ensuring that they are part of the decisions that they're making for themselves. And, you know, definitely the community power, the community voice was critical into why we were able to have success on getting the Harris Rise resolution passed. And, you know, the flip side of it, we, you know, while we did have a success, the vote did fall on party lines. So it was a 3-2 vote. But despite the fact that we had 3-2 vote, we knew that this was the opportunity to really get enforceable game-changing framework to address flooding and to center communities in recovery. So we were, while this framework also focused on the flood bond projects, we were encouraged that the application of this community task force and some of the values that we inserted into the Harris Thrives resolution can help Harris County Flood Control District think about future implementation, future planning for projects throughout Harris County. And this is an important first step in making that sustainable change for our region and within our political systems and the government that serves us. And kind of what Iris mentioned earlier too, with, you know, this wide array of folks that we brought to the table that helped us with the organizing, that participated in the policy planning and getting those words on paper to be the right mix of what we need and what our vision is for the future. You know, I think that's really the beauty of what SEER brings to our region. And we're able to bring together voices from a diverse set of interests that includes labor and organizing, affordable housing, conservation, environmental justice, and even groups who aren't a part of SEER. We're embracing this set of values because we recognize that to truly embrace equitable resiliency, we all have to work together. And this process was going to achieve all of our missions, regardless if it was explicitly named as such. So what's next? To fulfill this pledge of, you know, Iris outlined kind of what the resolution is meant to achieve. And a big part of that, which we're really excited about, is this community task force. And while this is supposed to be at least initially focused on project planning at flood control. We are working to ensure that this framework can extend past what the flood bond is able to achieve and really help inform Harris County flood control. So SEER, Bayou City Waterkeeper, and our partners at the Home Coalition and Texas Organizing Project are working to develop that framework with Harris County flood control so that residents can have that active voice in restoration and recovery, and also help identify those projects and programs that will really benefit their communities.
That's right. So where we are now is really helping to really structure that. You know, the task force is something that has been in existence for a number of years, and has, you know, this might sound familiar to what's in your landscape, been a body that has not really been super high functioning, that has been kind of more a tool of one-way communication, sort of a sounding board for our flood control district, has struggled to achieve quorum to be able to meet regularly. And so really this is about totally reimagining that body to really be an effective, high functioning place where the conversation can continue and where trainings and learning can happen, and where really we can kind of, you know, move at the speed of trust, because that's what the work requires, right? But to do that slow culture change, systems change work within our county government, to assemble, you know, different viewpoints that have not been a robust or meaningful part of the conversation to date, and to really bring in that comprehensive set of stakeholders who can really engage in a robust dialogue, and also, you know, poke and kind of ask questions about how we've done things and how we got here, and what it will take to unravel and to undo those systems and to change them. And so, you know, right now we're helping to craft some bylaws that will help set up a good structure and support for that body, again, regardless of what the administration or the government looks like, just making that a regular institutionalized practice within our county government. And then we'll be looking to, you know, to help recruit folks who would serve on the task force. So it'll be a body of 25 members, and there will be an executive committee made up of 6 members who will be able to vote on recommendations that will come out of the task force and go back to the county commission and back to the Harris County Flood Control District for action and potentially for a vote if that's required. And so in the first year, you know, we really hope to see that body be able to start the equity analysis of the work that flood control has done. And again, related to the bond, but beyond the bond itself, just the general practices and projects of the flood control district. We also hope that they will be able to create an equity scorecard, right, in collaboration with the community, especially with impacted community members who live in watersheds that have been overlooked and have been underinvested, to really engage with them about what success would look like, and to have them create a scorecard upon which progress can be measured. And then lastly, we hope that there will be a report. Kind of, we've seen this be a good output from other similar bodies across the country, a report that can really kind of lay the path for, you know, what analysis and kind of where we are right now and how we got here, and then what other recommendations, what other gaps are there to fill, and what set of resources will be needed to be able to advance those ideas. And so, you know, that I think it's taken longer than, again, we anticipated, to be able to kind of lay the framework and the foundation for that. But we're hopeful that the hard work on the front end will really help set that group up and that body up for success in the long term.
It's been so awesome to be able to work with an incredible group of people on this, and excited to see it come to fruition. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but definitely I think we're looking forward to this getting implemented this year. So that's going to be an exciting time for us. And certainly there's a lot of really great work being done at the county level, but I want to lift up City of Houston also. for the steps that they are taking to address resiliency. So within the City of Houston, we've been working with the offices of resiliency and sustainability as they outline their own plans to address vulnerabilities and opportunities within the city. This year has been so far a big one for them. Last year, 2019, was certainly a year of planning, and even before then, there was a lot of background work that was being done. So in February, the city launched their Resilient Houston Plan, which is part of the 100 Resilient Cities Initiative. And we were the 101st city, and we were incorporated right after Hurricane Harvey. And just last week on Earth Day, Houston released their Climate Action Plan. And both these plans are good first steps to think about how we can be more resilient, how we can tackle climate stressors and the need for climate adaptation, and think more holistically about our systems throughout the city. But as we've seen with the county, there's always room for improvement, especially to ensure that voices of communities are being heard and their needs are being met in meaningful ways. So we're excited to see this work moving forward, and we are also encouraged and encourage the city to continue to involve the public and uplift community voices in their planning and the implementation of these plans.
That's right. So we've covered a lot of ground and kind of went down memory lane to talk and reflect on this 2 years of work that's happened in Houston. We wanted to kind of summarize some of our major takeaways and lessons learned that hopefully are applicable to you all in your backyards where you're working. I think we've seen that this model can work. It's possible in engaging our own stakeholders here locally. We assembled and gathered a lot of lessons learned and best practices from other places and really talked to peers across the country. What has been really successful is also kind of match peer-to-peer with one another. So, in Chicago, finding a counterpoint for our executive director of flood control district, someone there who's working to advance this work so that they could connect and we would call it coaching, peer-to-peer coaching. They would call it maybe peer-to-peer networking or connection, but really just continuing to kind of meet our public sector where they are and addressing that learning curve. And so we're happy to be part of your network and your kitchen cabinet and share anything that we can that might be helpful to you. But that has been a major takeaway for us. Another is that we are a major metropolis of the country, right? We're one of the top 5 cities in the US, and I think there's a sentiment of we need to make sure that we can get it right here. We need to make sure that we can do better and that we're working to bring our leaders and decision makers along this path towards equity. And especially for making sure that we have a good example here in the Gulf South, where we have sort of our own unique set of challenges. Another takeaway is this is hard. This is hard work, and it takes a lot of time. It takes longer than maybe you plan for, or than a grant will fund for, or you have capacity for it. But it's really meaningful and necessary. And again, the message that this is not work that can be done by any one organization. This is really about working with, outside of your organization, working with partners and with in coalition with other groups. And then, making sure that the advocacy work is really tied back to community organizing and power building. I think that, as we lift it up, to not have that community voice represented from start to finish in the work, that is a critical element of success, and being able to tie it back to those elections and tie it back to the political power building. And I know groups have different limitations, but again, that's where the power of partnership can come into play, and making sure that there is that emphasis on community organizing and power building. And we hope that this work will be a model for other municipalities, especially ones of the size of Houston. And lastly, I think one of our major lessons was that how we do this work, right? How things get implemented matter just as much as what we do. To have the words equity in the bond language was important, but also how it got interpreted, how it got put into practice, and how today we're turning it into different actions matters just as much as having it included in the first place. And I think from the advocacy perspective, we're interested in real systems change, right? We're not interested in the window dressings or what some of my peers call fakequity, right? Like, this is really about how do we unravel these systems, and how do we have a day of reckoning about these systems not working for all of us, and owning that and knowing how to move forward. And that takes time. So the how matters just as much as the what.
Awesome. What a powerful way to close us out, Iris. And I think as you have heard us talk about, that's making them shovel ready, putting the shovel in the ground and starting to till the dirt is how we're going to make a fruitful and productive society, and certainly region for all of our communities. Really appreciate you joining us. Sorry that we can't be together in person to share in the success and hear about other things that y'all have been working on, but I'm going to include you'll see here, we have our email addresses and websites that you can reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions or would like to connect with us on any of these things. We'd love to hear what y'all are doing, and how we can all learn from one another. So thanks again for participating in our workshop, and we look forward to connecting with y'all again in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.